society. Prevention is key, as the seeds of radicalization are often laid prior to incarceration. This means investing in early intervention strategies that identify individuals at risk of radicalization and offering them alternative paths. Education, vocational training, and targeted support can help steer vulnerable individuals away from extremist influences and towards positive engagement. By addressing the root causes of radicalization, we can effectively reduce the number of extremists who end up behind bars. For those who are already incarcerated, we must prioritize disengagement, rehabilitation, and social reintegration. With more than 11 million people estimated to be imprisoned globally, prisons can become incubators for terrorist recruitment and the radicalization of inmates, including those with no history of violent extremism. We need to equip prison systems with the tools and expertise to prevent them from turning into breeding grounds for further radicalization. As prisoners' feelings of despair, frustration, and anger can leave them vulnerable to extremist ideologies. And we need to ensure that violent extremism prisoners are treated humanely and afforded their full rights to start them along the path to rehabilitation and reintegration into society. We must also address the unique needs of women and children associated with terrorist groups. Women may have been coerced into joining these groups, while children may have been born or raised within a radicalized environment. And we have heard this morning, for those of you who have attended the morning session, from 2 victims coming from Al-Hol camp. Providing them with specialized support, including counseling, education, and healthcare services, is essential to prevent their radicalization and ensure a brighter future for them and their communities. Together with UNOCT and CTED, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime implemented a global initiative between 2018 and 2022 to promote effective, humane, and sustainable approaches to the management of violent extremisms in prisons, guided by the Nelson Mandela Rules on the treatment of prisoners, of which UNODC is the proud custodian. In Kazakhstan, we trained over 4,000 prison officers on prison safety and security and developed a classification framework to separate prisoners with varying security, supervisory, and treatment requirements based on their risk of radicalization. We also conducted individualized risk assessment of over 600 prisoners in 8 prisons, including one for women offenders, to tailor rehabilitation responses appropriately. In Tunisia, we established the first ever Center for Research on Violent Extremism and Rehabilitation in the country to develop evidence-based rehabilitation and reintegration policies. We also trained more than 200 prison officers to improve their knowledge on the management of violent extremist prisoners while taking into account age and gender considerations. In Uganda, to reduce prison overcrowding, we launched a decongestion project to support 750 prisoners with legal aid and address the backlog of cases of prisoners awaiting trial. We also trained over 2,000 new recruits on preventing and countering violent extremism in prison settings, and trained a further 95 staff on the application of prisoner classification tools, which were piloted in 6 prisons across the country. Risk assessments and classification tools are crucial to assist prison staff in recognizing whether a prisoner is being or has become radicalized. So the work that UNODC is doing makes a real impact and creates the possibility to detect and prevent radicalization to violence at an early stage. Meanwhile, the role of civil society has proven valuable in compensating for the gaps created by the limited financial and human resources available in prison settings. In Iraq, for example, we are promoting the work of NGOs to mitigate the threat of terrorist and foreign terrorist fighter detainees by promoting sustainable, people-centered approaches to the management of prisons. This involves providing technical assistance to the government of Iraq to help develop skills of inmates through vocational and educational training, improve access to justice by providing legal aid, and promote a healthy and safe environment for prisoners. This experience has shown that NGOs can play an important complementary role in protecting society by ensuring the effective rehabilitation and reintegration of offenders. Ladies and gentlemen, managing violent extremism prisoners is a complex endeavor, but it is one that we cannot afford to ignore. It requires us to find a delicate balance between addressing security concerns and protecting human rights and due process, with the ultimate aim of preventing violence and fostering reintegration. By investing in comprehensive and evidence-based approaches, we can empower individuals to reject violence, embrace peaceful alternatives, and contribute positively to their communities. This is needed more than ever to make progress on SDG 16 to build peace, justice, and strong institutions and all of the SDGs. You can continue to count on UNODC to support member states in implementing inclusive terrorism prevention policies and practices so that we may break cycles of violence and build the foundations of a safer, more resilient world for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Director Ms. Wali. You already entered into the core issues of this side event, highlighting many important topics, and frankly speaking, it's impressive what you, as usual, UNODC do in this field. Without any other waiting for, I will give the floor to Ambassador Päivi Kairamo, my friend, Council of Europe Chair of the Committee on Counterterrorism and Ambassador for Counterterrorism Cooperation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. Päivi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Carlo. Executive Director Vali, Executive Director Kerman, Ambassador Kupica, colleagues, dear participants, good afternoon. I'm honored to be able to join this event first and foremost in my capacity as the chair of the Council of Europe Committee on Counterterrorism, and also, as mentioned by Carlo, as Ambassador for Counterterrorism Cooperation in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. I am so very glad to be here with our partners from Austria, the UNCTAD, the UNODC, the OSCE, and I'm also very grateful to the experts of this event for their willingness to join us to share their experience on this particular topic. As a brief introduction, allow me to say a few words of the work of the Council of Europe in the area of counterterrorism cooperation. The Committee on Counterterrorism, CDCT, is the key coordinating body for counterterrorism at the Council of Europe. The CDCT has produced a number of important standards in this area, notably the recent recommendation of the Committee of Ministers to Member States on the risk assessment of individuals indicated or convicted of, for terrorist offences. And we were advised, I should say, by a very prominent French expert in this area. The Council of Europe, through its specialized bodies on prisons and management of prisoners, has also developed influential guidelines and a handbook on addressing and preventing radicalization to terrorism in prison. These efforts come from an understanding that while there are many violent extremist prisoners in our penal systems, there need to be special regimes to prevent them from further radicalizing or even radicalizing others in prison, while also aiming to ensure that any radicalized individuals do not pose a continuing risk after their release. This is no easy task. Research and experience in this area continues to grow rapidly as we learn more about what works and what doesn't when dealing with the challenges presented by violent extremist prisoners. These are clearly challenges that no institution can handle alone. Multidisciplinary approaches are needed, requiring careful and regular cooperation with a range of professions such as mental health specialists, risk and security experts, education professionals, religious figures, community leaders, and many others. Equally, we must ensure that our approaches to managing violent extremist prisoners are effective, sustainable, and implemented in full respect of human rights and the rule of law. With so many stakeholders playing an important role in managing and rehabilitating violent extremist prisoners, we need events like this to help all stakeholders to strike a balance between individual freedoms and ensuring safety in prisons and among the general public. Just last month in May, the CDCT adopted a compilation of good practices with regards to de-radicalization, disengagement, and social reintegration. This resource resource provides an accessible and valuable snapshot of the main trends and actions several European states have taken to design and implement programs and activities for violent extremists and terrorists. The report is available online, and for your convenience, the link is included in today's agenda. Our leading expert on this effort, Dr. Ion Turnescu, is joining us via video link to explain more about this project and the main conclusions. The Council of Europe's work in this area does not end here, however. The Council of Europe recently adopted its counterterrorism strategy for 2023-27, which foresees several lines of work and action to support European efforts to prevent and prosecute terrorism and terrorist and violent extremism leading to terrorism, as well as protect civilians and states from the impact of terrorism. The strategy identifies de-radicalisation and disengagements for women and children, respectively, and as referred to by Executive Director Vali, during her introductory remarks, also as a particular focus area for CDCT. Conclusion. Excellencies, I'm honored to be able to participate in this event with you, all of you. As the chair of the CDCT, I look forward to engaging further on these issues, and we hope that all of you here today can find some use and inspiration from our ongoing work in this crucial area. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kairamo, dear Päivi, for mentioning, by the way, some recent work carried out by the Council of Europe in this area, but we will listen more by our expert later. So without any further hesitation, I will give the floor to Ambassador Elena Kupčina, Coordinator to Address International Threats at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Please, Ms.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, dear friends. First of all, allow me to thank the Council of Europe, UNCTAD, Austria, Finland, and UNODC for joining forces on the important topic of managing violent extremist prisoners. With all these partners, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe has long-standing relationships, and this side event is a clear evidence of this. Challenges with terrorist offenders concern societies when responding to all forms of violent extremism and terrorism. For the OSCE area, the situation concerning so-called foreign terrorist fighters and their families still detained in the former conflict zone remains a particular concern. As of today, approximately 10,000 male ISIS detainees and more than 56,000 women and associated children are being held in camps in northeast Syria. While the terrorist insurgency in the immediate region may be currently contained, the fate of these individuals and the associated humanitarian and security crisis threatens an eventual resurgence. The population of Al-Hol and Al-Roj, the two largest camps, consist of 60% children, mostly under the age of 12. While the FTF issue is mainly be regarded as a security concern, this age composition points to an ongoing human rights crisis affecting the most vulnerable. Security considerations by source countries need to include those risks associated with a decision not to repatriate. This can imply losing track of individuals that leave the camps, allowing further radicalization and hardening of terrorist networks, risking remote incitement or recruitment from the camps, feeding into the terrorist narrative that those held are victims, or letting FTF crimes go unpunished. Against this backdrop, 2 weeks ago, the Transnational Threats Department Action Against Terrorism Unit of our organization recently joined forces with the International Center for the Study of Radicalisation at King's College London and the Middle East Institute in organizing a policy discussion titled Resolving the Detainee Dilemma at the OSCE in Vienna. covering the above-mentioned questions as well as challenges related to the prosecution, detention, rehabilitation, and reintegration of former foreign terrorist fighters and their family members. Among others, experts from UNODC, CITAD, and Finland joined these discussions, building on earlier FTF-related efforts, such as 2020 regional conference co-organized by OSCE, UNOCT, and Switzerland, follow-up discussions with experts from Central Asia and Southeastern Europe, or the OSCE ODIHR guidelines for addressing FTF challenges in a human rights framework, as well as on related detention monitoring. The outcomes from this recent exchange with experts across the OSCE area will feed into next steps planned in assisting our membership and partners for cooperation, not only participating states whom we call like this in the OSCE, but also partners for cooperation in the Mediterranean area. Jointly with the International Institute of Justice and the Rule of Law in Malta, we are planning a regional event in Central Asia focusing on violent extremist offenders in prisons. Moreover, we are developing a project for the entire OSCE area, including modules on assessing risks from a security and a rehabilitation angle, training on specific prosecution challenges, and efforts in rehabilitation and reintegration within and outside of prison. In developing and implementing this assistance, we will be relying also on the extensive work done by the OSCE field operations, for example, in Albania or Tajikistan, on improving prison conditions in general, and on addressing terrorist offenders behind bars. The OSCE Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights above-mentioned guidebook and training for independent detention monitors piloted last year in Kyrgyzstan will also be among the existing resources utilized. Sharing this strong mandate on the FTF topic across our organizations, we will continue to address these challenges in a coordinated and cooperative manner, thereby making best use of limited resources and exploring synergies whenever possible, of course. Updates to the OSCE's Memorandum of Understanding and joint action plans with various UN partners, as well as our ongoing cooperation with the Council of Europe on counterterrorism matters, set the stage for such continued partnerships. Let me conclude by thanking the Council of Europe, UNCTAD, Austria, Finland, and our partners across the Danube, UNODC, once again for this joint side event on such an important topic. My team at the OSCE will be reaching out to all partners in the development and implementation of the aforementioned project proposal to make best use of the expertise on the topic developed already at the UN, the Council of Europe, and among national agencies and civil society organizations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador, for your remarks. You raised one very, very important issue, of course, that we all are dealing with in our different settings, the problem of the people kept in the camps in Syria, above all, and Iraq, and also, of course, your numerous projects in different areas. Now I will give the floor immediately to Ms. Natalia German, the Executive Director of the United Nations Counterterrorism Executive Directorate, CITAD. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, dear Mr. Chairman, Your Excellencies, my distinguished co-panelists, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to join this important event, and I would like to thank the Council of Europe, OSCE, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, as well as my own office, CITAD, for all your good work to put today's event together. The management of violent extremist prisoners presents unique challenges to all of us working in the counterterrorism field. For one thing, it is an area where the practice of countering violent extremism has an exceptional urgency. It focuses on individuals who have already shown an inclination towards terrorist violence and who in many cases may be due for release within relatively brief periods of time. There is an urgency to ensure that these individuals are convinced to renounce their commitment to violence so that society at large can enjoy the fundamental right to personal security. Our topic today is also unique, of course, because it concerns a population that is deprived of liberty, and the imprisonment of these individuals may be appropriate and just, but it means they are not in a position of subjugation. Their treatment must be firm and deliberate, but it must also take due account of their human rights. The fact is, prison environments are highly conducive to radicalization, to terrorist violence. Prisoners may be convinced that their confinement is unjust. The restrictive prison environment is highly susceptible to manipulation by those advising violent extremist ideologies. This is why prisons are sometimes referred to as hotbeds for terrorism and terrorist recruitment. CETAT has been doing its part to support member states in this crucial area of work, including through our recent joint project with UNODC and UNOCT. We recently published an analytical brief on this issue and the several key findings we have learned throughout our work. There remains much uncertainty about the scope of the issue. Member states take different approaches to counting and classifying violent extremist prisoners, and reliable data are lacking. However, it seems clear that the number of such prisoners in countries around the world is growing. It is also evident that tailored risk assessments are crucial in this field. Violent extremist prisoners are a diverse group, which necessitates the implementation of different approaches, although this is resource-intensive. The experts who are with us today can help to shed light on the types of initiatives that are showing some positive results. We also know that women prisoners require specific approaches. Women's involvement in violent extremism conducive to terrorism has reportedly tripled in the past decade, yet their separation and isolation in prison environments often mean that their needs are overlooked. And as I have already said, a human rights-based approach is critical in this area. It is essential that states pay careful attention to maintaining prison environments that are humane and respectful of human dignity, in accordance with the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, the Nelson Mandela Rules. The issue of management of prisoners also raises issues regarding the rights to freedom of thought, freedom of belief. It is entirely appropriate for states to work to suppress and eradicate ideologies that support and incite terrorist violence, but more difficult questions may arise with respect to certain viewpoints that may not enjoy the favor of states, but that are not connected to the perpetration of violence. Drawing the boundaries of appropriate intervention into personal belief systems by states may raise sensitive issues. And beyond that, interventions aimed at preventing radicalization to violence in prisons cannot ignore the underlying issues that may be conducive to the spread of terrorism. That is not to say that terrorist violence can never be justified. It cannot, never. But effective interventions should be based on a comprehensive understanding of the causes of radicalization. Some of these issues, such as questions of discrimination, marginalization, poor governance, and other issues, should be taken into account by practitioners in this field, even as we collectively reject the resort to terrorist violence to address them. CETAT remains committed to engaging with member states through our country visits on behalf of the Counter-Terrorism Committee and our ongoing dialogue to identify key challenges and promote the implementation of best practices in this field. And we will continue our endeavors to facilitate technical assistance projects for member states that request them to support them in their crucial counter-terrorism efforts. I thank you.
And I thank you, Ms. German, also for your very valuable opening remarks. I think that our four panelists speakers who have introduced this side event have very well set the scene for, I'm sure, a very fruitful now discussion in this room and online. Many important items have been raised already. The prevention of course, of radicalization in prisons, the protection of human rights, always to be taken into account, the violent extremist prisoners. We do not have, I agree, a clear picture of the situation in the prisons with regard to this situation, the condition of women prisoners. Many important issues have already been raised, and so I thank you very much for that. Now I will open then the expert panel. We have many important and good experts with us today. So I would kindly ask you all to be respectful of the time limits, please, because we would like, of course, to have some time at the end for questions. So keep also those speakers also for the final questions at the end. In principle, each panelist has maximum of 6 minutes, and I have a powerful tool here. No. No, I'm quite flexible, I must say. Well, without, of course, wasting any additional time, I will immediately give the floor to our first speaker, who is Ambassador Hakan Rahmetulin, a permanent representative for Republic of Kazakhstan to the United Nations. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's quite a challenge to speak after such a nice group of distinguished and absolutely astonishing leaders, but I will try my best. And dear colleagues, dear friends, today I wanted to share with you experience of Kazakhstan on returning and rehabilitating the families, citizens of Kazakhstan back home from the zones of conflict in Syria and Iraq. And actually, there is no exact number of Kazakhstan citizens who moved to Syria and Iraq and joined jihadists. The number varies from 800 to 1,000, and they joined the Islamic State. Most of them went there in 2013, 2015. There were many reasons for why people started moving there and joining the ISIS. It's low religious literacy, the influence of terrorist organizations, their propaganda, the availability and light accessibility of the different sources in social media, the unfavorable socio-economic conditions, particularly in rural areas, and psychological factors, and many others, including, for example, unemployment. And every recruitment history is different. Each case is a combination of several reasons and factors. Not only men left, but they were also accompanied by women and children. Many of them got married there, while, even girls, women were living separately without men accompanying them, but they met there and created family and even giving birth to their children. And many of those who went to Syria and Iraq did not speak Arabic, had no cultural, historical ties with the Middle East, and had a poor understanding of the context of conflict in the region. How the return operation evolved. Actually, in 2018, in Syria, province Deir ez-Zor, city of Baghuz, on the bank of the Euphrates River, cornered Daesh militant, together with their wives and children, gathered. There were thousands of them from all over the world. The leaders of the Caliphate, who had previously called for jihad, mostly Arabs, had already fled and left them to die. Kurdish militias, with the support of Western aviation, tightened the ring around the city more and more. That was the situation where hundreds of Kazakhstan citizens found themselves. Those who just few years left for Syria, befuddled by the ideas of building a world Islamic Caliphate, were among them. Even then, many of them, faced with reality, realized that they had been deceived and trapped. There was no Sharia here, and there never was. So they never being attracted by the ideas to follow the Sharia law, they never saw the Sharia law in practice. Their amirs, in the converted commas, fought for profit, not for ideology. And yesterday's, again, brothers-in-law, brothers in faith, easily betrayed. There was only one left way to survive, to give up, or to die. And they went along humanitarian corridors, surrendered to the Kurds militias, their women and children. And all of them were placed in hastily built prisons and refugees camps. The conditions in camps were absolutely unbearable: hunger, unsanitary diseases, extremely high mortality, especially among young children. In the spring 2018, the first signals came from women, captive women. They managed to contact their relatives in Kazakhstan, and then they tried to organize the communication with the representatives of the National Service Forces. And all of them implored to be taken back to their homeland, repentant and ready to be punished. Against this background, the idea of evacuating Kazakhstan citizens from Syria was born. The evacuation operation was conditionally named Zhusan. Zhusan means wormwood in Kazakh, the bush. In Kazakh culture, steppe wormwood is a symbol of the motherland. Therefore, the operation to repatriate Kazakh citizens was called this name, symbolic name. I have to say that the development of the operation was not easy. There was no doubt about the militants. They should be brought to Kazakhstan and face the deserved punishment. But but women and children, in particular teenagers, are the terrorists or who need the harsh punishment, or victims who need rehabilitation and return to society and reintegration. There were many skepticism, and opponents of evacuating them argued that women and children should be left abroad. They would never be radicalized, and therefore repatriation will lead to the transfer of extremist and poisonous ideology to Kazakhstan. And the final decision was taken by that time President Nazarbayev, who underscored the humanitarian character of this operation. The bulk of the repatriates were children and women who were forced to leave for Syria after their husbands. And their return to Kazakhstan will eliminate the risk of their repeated participation in terrorist activities in the future. And a powerful base would be created for countering propaganda of radical ideas among believers. It was necessary to keep balanced and differentiated approach. Whoever had committed a crime, even if it was a woman, would take responsibility according to the law. All repatriates would undergo rehabilitation and resocialization programs. Based on such criteria, in the middle of 2018, massive preparatory work, organizational operational work started. We worked with our partners from the United States, from Turkey, and through operational channels it was possible to reach the Kurdish militia in Syria. The special operative team was cooperating with local command in locating and identifying citizens of Kazakhstan and compiling lists of returnees. It was a joint action of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Defense, Internal Affairs, Ministry of Education and Science, the Prosecutor General's Office, and regional authorities, and a number of other government agencies. And the first repatriating flight returned to Kazakhstan in January 2019. In general, there were 5 flights operated through from 19 to 21, and we repatriated 607 citizens, among them 37 men, 157 women, 413 children, including 14 orphaned. Besides, in November 2019, 14 more Kazakh children were evacuated from Iraq. The underage children were held in Iraq prisons together with their mothers, who had been accused of involvement in terrorist activities. The children are aged from 1 to 13 and had witnessed the horrors of war and conflict after spending almost 2 years in the Rusafa prison in Baghdad. 45 people of them, of returnees, particularly 33 men and 12 women, were sentenced for their involvement in terrorism. Shortly about their rehabilitation back in Kazakhstan. In the western part of Kazakhstan, in Aktau city, on the shore of the Caspian Sea, the Rehabilitation Center for Women and Children was created. And during the first 30 days after returning to Kazakhstan, they began their journey to a peaceful life. They were examined and treated by doctors, psychologists, theologians, and religious scholars worked with them. And temporary schools and kindergartens with teachers and tutors functioned for their children. Their national identification documents were restored and reissued. The genomic test was organized for those who were born there, who were not born in Kazakhstan, were brought there. At the end of the 30 days quarantine, all women and children were escorted to the place where they lived before leaving for Syria. None of them subsequently returned to terrorist activity. None of them ever committed any terrorist attack. Of course, they are under the strong scrutiny of the special agencies, of law enforcement, of the local authorities, including with the communities and neighborhoods. And special attention is paid to the prompt monitoring, verification of repatriates, and both in the rehabilitation center in the post-quarantine period. Their surveys and questionnaires were conducted. And based on this survey, they were given special conclusion and decision taken about whether they are still representing danger for society or not. And later, based on this experience and available operational materials, among those who were first left there, 18 women were brought to criminal responsibility and isolated. The comprehensive program for the adaptation, rehabilitation of repatriated women and children was developed. The program implementation resulted in the vast majority of women and children who have already converted to traditional Islam, and some of them even have chosen the secular lifestyle. Those who have abandoned radical ideology themselves actively participate in the counter-propaganda actions in regional Republican mass media. As for the Kazakh militants taken out of Syria, all 37 men, as I mentioned, were detained and convicted, and the detention sentence length from 8 years, I think, till 15 years. We actually don't know what would happen after this time is over, whether they will be de-radicalized or not, and this is why for us it's also quite a challenge to decide where do they have to be kept, in these separate jails, or detention facilities, or in general facilities. So we still work on that. So it was, as I said, it was a challenge to ensure balance between rehabilitation and punishment. And with regard to the people sentence for terrorism and extremism related offenses, a set of individually tailored rehabilitation and de-radicalization activities have been implemented and initiated, with particular focus on theological, psychological, ideological, and family support. And as I said, all these prisoners never committed any kind of crime. So in order to save time, I would stop here because I have much more to say, but thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, to share with us the experience of Kazakhstan on these programs of rehabilitation, reintegration of these people. Now, the second speaker is Dr. Ioan Durnescu from the University of Bucharest. He's also Vice Chair of the RAN Rehabilitation Working Group and lead author of our, Council of Europe, recent compilation of good practices with regards to de-radicalization, disengagement, and social reintegration. Ioan, I hope I can give you, I certainly can give you the floor. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. It's Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here and present in front of such a distinguished audience. Can you all hear me? Is all good?
Yeah.
Is it working?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Like any academic, I'm in love with my slides, so I have my slides with me today, so I would like to share them with you if it's okay. Okay, so this is it.
Of course, it's okay.
Excellent. So my presentation will be very brief. I will try to stay within 6 minutes. I will try to share with you the main the highlights of the mini study that we performed within the Council of Europe on the good practices. The presentation will have 3 parts: the brief history of the project, the methodology, and the conclusions. Of course, the conclusions will be a little bit more elaborated because we really think that they are relevant for Council of Europe member states, but also for other jurisdictions as well. A brief history. In 2018, the Committee of the Ministers of the Council of Europe instructed the Committee on Counterterrorism to draw a counterterrorism strategy, 2018 and 2022. Afterwards, in May 2021, the Committee on Counterterrorism decided to initiate this, to set up this working group to collect information about de-radicalization, disengagement programs. So this is where the work started in May 2021. The methodology, briefly speaking, of this mini study aimed at providing a snapshot of the current programs aimed at de-radicalization, disengagement, and social reintegration for individuals convicted for terrorist-related offenses or at risk of becoming involved in this phenomenon. So the focus of this mini study was actually tertiary prevention programs and interventions, not primary and secondary prevention. The subsidiary aim of the report was assisting member states to learn from each other and supporting the subsequent follow-up activities envisaged by the Council of Europe Counterterrorist Strategy for 2023-2027. So we hope that we will build on this report in the following activities. The mini study was based on 4 primary sources. We had a questionnaire that we sent across the member states. And then we had follow-up interviews trying to go into depth with some topics. Then we did a rapid literature review, trying to connect what we learned from the field with the state of the art in terms of research. And we also did a brief consultation of the RAN collection. By good practices, just to have a common understanding of this concept, we understood practices that were considered by the member states as effective, sustainable, and transferable. So we really wanted to produce something that is highly relevant for most of the member states and even beyond the member states Council of Europe. The conclusions, and slowly we move to the end of this presentation. The conclusions are that there is a significant progress in designing interventions and programs in de-radicalization, disengagement, and social reintegration. The progress is incremental, it's step by step. You can see progress from one year to another. However, this progress is quite uneven. You see quite a lot of progress in some countries, especially countries that where the phenomenon, the terrorist phenomenon is quite prevalent. But on the other hand, you don't really see a lot of progress in countries where this phenomenon does not exist. So unfortunately, we do not see a lot of preparation from the states, especially where the phenomenon is not really present yet. Probably, hopefully, it will never happen, but one never know. We have quite a wide variety of programs and initiatives. We managed to build up a sort of typology of the programs. We have programs focused on single issue or single intervention, like DRAD in Austria, that is focusing on ideology, only on de-radicalization. And then we have comprehensive programs like PAIRS or ENTRE in Sweden that cover quite a lot of activities and interventions from cognitive behavioral interventions, mentoring, vocational training, creative arts, and so on. And then in countries like Belgium, we have individual trajectories where all these activities are actually tailor-made to each case in particular. What we noticed when looking at these programs and interventions, we saw that they are deeply cultural and context dependent. So when we design this kind of interventions, we really need to pay attention to the tradition, to the culture, even to the institutional architecture of the country. So copy paste does not work. Maybe emulation or other strategies for penal policy transfer. Also very important to. It's very important for these interventions and programs to have a solid and explicit legal context, especially when it comes to the principle of multi-agency interventions, because only with a very solid legal context, this multi-agency, interdisciplinary, multi-professional interventions can really take place in a kind of transparent, well-set environment. Like a new trend, let's say, we see more and more actors involved in this field. We see quite a lot of interventions using formers. We see quite a lot of local municipalities involved in these interventions in countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, and so on. So I think there are more and more actors involved in the field beyond the more traditional, let's say, actors. Very important, the principle of tailor-made or individualization, especially when it comes to the personal trajectories. Very important also the principle of voluntary participation. Also when the participation is prescribed by the judicial sentence or something like that, even in that situation, it's very important to work on the motivation of individuals to take part in the activities. We were able to identify some very interesting and very powerful experiences, especially when it comes to involving the victims and involving the communities. And I would like to share with you two good examples like that. For instance, we have a book written after the Bataclan attacks. We still have words written by the parents of two people involved, let's say, in this tragic event. And then we have the group work and the documentary Beyond the Tears in Belgium. Both these initiatives can be found on internet, and I would suggest people to have a look at those and get inspiration from them in terms of, you know, working with the victims, working with the communities, trying to heal the trauma. We still wait for a lot of progress in different research in different fields. For example, we need more research on defining success, on post-exit in particular. I think we need to go beyond reoffending and we need to look at more indicators like well-being, social integration, and so on. So we need to be a little bit more inclusive when it comes to defining success of these interventions. We still have quite a lot of difficulties in terms of including the gender, the human rights, and the sustainability dimensions. We still see quite a lot of good interventions, good initiatives that die after 2 or 3 years once the projects, let's say, ended. Again, another field where we can do more is the community involvement. We see quite a lot of concern with individuals. We work quite a lot of individuals, but we tend to neglect their context, sometimes their families and their communities. So this is what we learned from this exercise. Of course, the report has a lot of details and a lot of interesting examples. So if you find the time to look at it, I hope you will be happy to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Durnescu, dear Johan, and for summarizing in 6 minutes the enormous bunch of work that you have put in this document, which I also invite everyone interested in this matter to read carefully. Now, the third speaker is Dr. Florian Emendinger, coordinator in the Federal Ministry of Justice of Austria. The floor is yours, please.
Dear Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Florian Hammerdinger, and I'm the coordinator of the Coordination Unit for Extremism Prevention and De-Radicalization at the Austrian Federal Ministry of Justice. During my presentation, which has the title Extremism in the Austrian Penal System, I would like to give you some insights into our practice of dealing with terrorist offenders. However, before I start, I would like to thank the organizers of the United Nations and the Council of Europe to give us the occasion to present our work at this important event. In Austria, we adhere to the following strategies. As far as information management is concerned, a seamless and interagency flow of information is essential. When dealing with prisoners, we aim for the greatest possible normalization. Prisoners convicted of terrorism offenses are not concentrated locally. Normalization also means as much security as necessary, as much freedom as possible. Inmates convicted of terrorism are not subjected to restrictions or different treatment than other inmates, as long as security concerns allow this. The monitoring is carried out in a rather passive way, as otherwise there is a risk of not obtaining information due to active monitoring. Measures are taken on a multi-professional basis, including a precise risk management and legally binding case conferences. Close cooperation with all involved authorities is always sought. However, before we talk about measures or interventions, we need to talk about the information management that must precede these measures. Without the appropriate information, targeted measures cannot even be implemented. The flow of information must be seamless, interagency, standardized, and compelling. In the penal system, the most effective way to obtain and manage information is the dynamic security concept in conjunction with the prison intelligence concept. So how does information management work in Austrian penitentiary system? The most important aspect is the ordinary staff, because they are by far the ones who are the most in contact with the prisoners. If essential and available information is not obtained, analyzed, and forwarded to the right contact, there is no need to discuss measures. Therefore, the needed information about the concerning inmates needs to be gathered. If someone is in prison, you have potentially a lot of information, because he is there 24/7. The flow of information is guaranteed by compulsory reporting requirements. Prisons are obliged to report certain circumstances to the appropriate units. For example, misdemeanors, discoveries of questionable symbols, desired outside contacts, and so on. Intelligence is thus ensured by cooperation between the state protection authorities and the prison intelligence system, as well as by information analysis to that effect. Standardized reporting modalities have likewise been set up between the state protection authorities and the prison administration, which has reduced the danger of information leakage. Based on the information obtained, targeted actions can then be taken. These can be high-level as well as low-level measures. The examples are set up here. Low-level measures should not be underestimated. They can be very effective. In one case of successful de-radicalization, the decisive factor was that the inmate was housed together with a Christian Austrian and got along well with him. He mentioned this in a follow-up interview. So thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for this interesting presentation. And now our fourth, first of all, I wanted to say that we will still have some additional time after 2:30 for questions, so don't worry about the time. Yes, worry about the time, but not so worried as it was planned at the beginning. So our first speaker will be Mr. Wilson Francis Magomu, Senior Commissioner of Prisons and Counterterrorism Focal Point in Uganda Prison Service. But before giving you the floor, I wanted to express on behalf, I think, of everyone in this room, our deep condolences to you and to your country, Uganda, of course, for the terrible event that happened a few days ago in your country. Now I give you the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, the distinguished guests, the panelists. I will start by thanking the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share with you the experience that Uganda Prison Service has gone through in the management of violent extremist prisoners. We appreciate your condolence message, sympathizing with Uganda. I think it was the last Friday in the evening that we had that tragic event where the suspected violent extremist rebel group attacked a secondary school, boarding school, and you saw what happened. It was really a very big tragedy. I want also to bring to your attention that Uganda was among the 3 beneficiary countries that benefited from the global initiative of supporting the management violent prisoners and stopping radicalization within the prisons. So on that note, I want to acknowledge and thank the following: the European Union that gave part of the funding, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, the UN Counterterrorism Center, and the UN Security Council Counterterrorism Committee Directorate, and the UN ODC. So that really helped us really to get into how to manage the violent extreme prisoners. Uganda prisons, the population of prisoners is, as of this morning, we have a population of 76,095 prisoners. And these are spread, are being held in over 253 prison units. The annual prisoners' gross population is 8.3. So every year, the population of prisoners is growing. Our actual, what would be the ideal situation would be like 20,321 prisoners. But as I've told you, as of this morning, we have a population of 76,095 prisoners. So this means that we are holding in excess of 56,000 prisoners. When you look at the staff ratio to the prisoners, we are at 1:7. So the staff are constrained. So what did we benefit from the global, the support from the global initiative? One was that we are able to integrate the PCVE modules into our training curriculum. We thought that this would form the basis and act as a sustainable way of trying to roll out the curriculum and training of the staff. We also developed a prison policy on intelligence. We now have a prison intelligence in place, which is well structured, and what is remaining is now rolling out and implementing it into other units. We also developed a prisoners classification framework, which is based on the risk and needs assessment of all persons that come into prison. In the past, we have been really gambling and we didn't know how to go about that. So now this is in place. Currently, we are developing an integrated rehabilitation and reintegration model for prisoners who are being charged of violent extremist prisoners. We have a total of 171 prisoners who have been charged with the terrorism-related cases, and out of this, 168 are still awaiting pre-trial. They are still on remand. Of this, we have 154 who are men, and we have a total of 14 who are women. Challenges. When you follow my presentation, you'll find that we have a problem of overcrowding. So most of the prisons are overcrowded, and this makes it very hard really to engage and manage these violent extremist prisoners. So it's a very big challenge that we have. Secondly, we have also a problem of delayed trials. Most of these terrorism-related cases tend to take a long time to be tried, and also the investigations are still ongoing. Thirdly, like you have said, terrorism in our country is active, as you have noticed. Not long ago, like 2 years ago, we had 1 year and a half, we had Kampala bombings where a number of people were killed. Now this has been followed by what happened on last Friday. So the terrorism threat is very active. And because of that, maybe it is based on our involvement in the fight against terrorism in Somalia and also in the DRC. So we have also the challenges of now training the staff so that really they can live to the task, because the problem is ongoing and it is quite huge. So those are the few experiences that I wanted to share with you. I want to thank you very much for listening and for inviting us to participate in this forum. I thank you very much.